Okay, picture this. It's the first day of class at an elementary school. The doors open up, the morning bells ring, but the hallways, they are completely, eerily silent. Not a single new student walks through the front door. Now, this isn't some dystopian sci-fi movie. It is the visceral, everyday reality unfolding right now. By the time we hit 2026, 210 elementary schools nationwide in South Korea are going to have exactly 0 new first graders. 0. That is a massive 81% increase from just 5 years ago. In fact, over the past decade, more than 4,000 Korean schools have permanently shut their doors. South Korea is literally running out of people. And I'm telling you, this explainer is the ultimate canary in the coal mine for the entire developed world. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this, we have to look at the brutal math. We are watching a demographic death spiral in real time. Seriously, think about this. 100 Koreans today will produce only 36 children. Those 36 kids, they'll produce just 13 grandchildren. And those 13 will leave behind a grand total of 5 great-grandchildren. 5. It takes only 4 generations for the population of a $1.7 trillion economy to just completely collapse to a mere 5% of its current size. Okay, let's dive into this. Because look, every country currently facing a fertility crisis has some sort of plan. But South Korea? They actually have 6 of them. Today, we are going to walk through this explainer, covering South Korea's desperate demographic survival strategies. We're going to look at the unbelievable lengths the government is going to, the fatal flaws hardwired into each strategy, and ultimately what this wild, unprecedented experiment means for all of us. Here is our quick roadmap for today. First, we'll look at domestic fixes, which means cash and robots. Then, immigration policies for workers and wives. After that, the Hail Marys of unification and exports, and we'll wrap up with the illusion of recent data and a warning for the globe. Starting off with Section 1, domestic fixes, specifically cash and robots. So, the government's very first, and definitely their loudest strategy, has been trying to just literally buy their way out of this crisis, while at the exact same time racing to automate the entire economy. Since 2006, South Korea has thrown over $270 billion at pro-natalist policies. We're talking cash baby bonuses, free childcare, huge tax breaks, the whole shebang. But it hasn't worked at all. Now, what's really interesting about this data is the staggering, almost comical disconnect between the government's financial incentives and the actual reality on the ground. A typical government baby bonus might be around $10,000. Sounds nice, right? But studies show South Korea is the absolute most expensive country in the world to raise a child, costing roughly $272,000 just to get a kid to age 18. A $10,000 bonus isn't an incentive, it's practically a rounding error. So where is all that money actually going? Well, it's going here, to the Hagwon. These are essentially private cram schools that kids go to from elementary school all the way up, often running until 10 at night, 6 days a week. And get this, it is not just for the ultra-gifted kids, it's an absolute necessity for everyone. Why? Because virtually every successful adult outcome in Korea is totally gated by getting into one of 3 prestigious universities, collectively known as SKY. Less than 2% of students actually get in, and the agonizing 8-hour entrance exam requires this drilled, intense pattern recognition that public schools just do not teach. So parents are collectively draining $20 billion a year on private tutoring. They are completely tapped out. They simply cannot afford to have a second child. So if you literally can't afford to create new human workers, what is the backup domestic plan? You replace them with robots. You can already see this happening live in Seoul. Robot servers bringing you coffee, automated room service zipping down hotel hallways. This isn't just a fun tech gimmick. South Korea has the absolute highest robot density on planet Earth. The government is pouring billions into humanoid robots, hoping to become the global leader in physical AI by 2030. Their grand vision is a post-scarcity utopia, an economy of absolute abundance. And they need this to happen fast because their working-age population is going to plummet by 44% by 2067, and the entire pension system is slated to fail in 2071. But hold on a second, there is a massive fatal flaw with this whole automation plan. Who actually owns the robots? Despite having the highest robot density in the world right now, the productivity gains in Korea have almost entirely gone straight to corporate shareholders. The whole idea that automation will somehow create abundance for everyone relies entirely on solving a giant political problem: wealth distribution. How exactly do you tax robot labor to pay for human pensions? Right now, absolutely nothing in the Korean political economy suggests they are even remotely close to figuring that out. Moving right along to Section 2, immigration focusing on workers and wives. With that massive 44% drop in the workforce looming over them, the math is crystal clear. Korea desperately needs bodies. They are projected to need 900,000 additional workers by 2032 just to maintain basic, bare minimum economic growth. But they are hitting a massive cultural roadblock. South Korea is one of the most ethnically homogeneous societies in the entire developed world, hovering around 95% Korean. To replace that future drop in workers, they would have to admit roughly 15 million foreign workers in their families, which would suddenly make the country 30% foreign-born. And recent polling, it shows that while 45% of Koreans say they generally accept foreign nationals, only 7.2% accept migrant workers as actual integrated members of society. There is simply no political coalition right now that is going to greenlight mass immigration.
So, how in the world are they handling this? The contrast is fascinating. For standard labor, they lean on the E-9 visa for factory and farm workers, but it is strictly temporary. We're talking 3 to 5 years, no path to citizenship whatsoever, and absolutely no family allowed. But then there is the fourth plan: importing wives. Rural Korean men, who are often left behind as local women move to the massive megacities, are marrying women from Vietnam, the Philippines, and China. And unlike the farm workers, this path offers permanent residency and full citizenship. In fact, over 35 rural municipalities actively subsidize this. They are paying men up to $145,000 just to marry foreign women. It is crazy, but it's Korea's only sustained mass migration program, and it's been running quietly in the background for 30 years.
But as you might expect, there is a very dark reality to this. The children born from these marriages, who are legally termed multicultural children, face incredibly intense, systematic bullying and discrimination in schools. It's heartbreaking. The bullying is so severe that the government actually has to specifically fund anti-discrimination and anti-bullying curriculums nationwide. And yet, despite all of that, this remains Korea's most successful immigration policy. Honestly, that alone tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the viability of mass migration as some kind of silver bullet for this crisis. All right, on to Section 3, the Hail Marys. We're talking unification and exports. These are what you'd call the sheer desperation plays, waiting for a massive geopolitical miracle or just betting the entire farm on massive corporate conglomerates. Plan 5 is the one people aren't really supposed to say out loud. Just wait for North Korea to collapse. The demographic contrast here is absolutely stark. South Korea's fertility rate is sitting at a dismal 0.72, which is literally the lowest ever recorded in human history during peacetime. Meanwhile, North Korea's is estimated to be around 1.78. Plus, they have 26.4 million people, with an age pyramid that still heavily bulges in those crucial under 40 brackets. If the peninsula magically unifies on Seoul's terms, South Korea instantly inherits over 26 million new citizens, most of them working or military age. On paper, it looks like a demographic jackpot. But let's be real, it is purely a fantasy on paper. The South Korean government's own internal estimates put the economic integration cost at over $3 trillion. And geopolitically, it's a complete non-starter. China is absolutely not going to tolerate a unified, heavily U.S.-allied Korea sitting right on its 1,400-kilometer border. They will not absorb the inevitable massive refugee crisis, and there is no way they'll let American forces secure North Korea's 40 to 50 nuclear warheads all by themselves. If North Korea falls, China intervenes. End of story. That demographic windfall is never, ever going to materialize. So that leaves Plan 6. Basically, put all your chips on the table and bet everything on export behemoths like Samsung, SK, and Hyundai to just drag the economy forward, even as the population totally shrinks. But fierce global rivals are rapidly eating away at Korea's technological dominance. Over in Taiwan, TSMC is just devouring Samsung's foundry business at the leading edge. Meanwhile, massive Chinese competitors like YMTC and CXMT are aggressively closing the gap in memory and DRAM manufacturing. Betting the entire future survival of a nation on a handful of massive firms holding off cutthroat global competition indefinitely, yeah, that's a failing strategy. And that brings us to our final section, the illusion and the warning. So after blowing hundreds of billions of dollars over 20 years across all these failing plans, something incredibly strange suddenly showed up in the data. In 2024 and 2025, the fertility rate actually rose. And then out of nowhere, in January of 2026, the monthly fertility rate spiked to 0.99. That was the absolute highest single-month figure in nearly 7 years, capping off 18 consecutive months of year-on-year increases. Looking at this isolated number, you might legitimately be asking yourself, wait, no way, did all these wild plans actually work? So the crucial point is, absolutely not. The government is, of course, already out there trying to declare an early victory, but this is a massive statistical illusion. First off, Korea had intense pandemic restrictions that suppressed weddings for up to 4 years. And because marriage is a very strict cultural prerequisite for having a child in Korea, the end of the pandemic essentially just released a massive one-time backlog of delayed weddings and subsequent births. Second, it just so happens there is a temporary demographic bulge of women currently in prime childbearing age right now. And third, they're seeing a slight bump from immigrant fertility, which, by the way, actually peaked years ago. The underlying trend, the actual rate at which a typical Korean woman expects to have children, has not budged a single centimeter. The hard truth is that wealth and policy simply cannot engineer a way out of a demographic collapse. South Korea is basically running a live test to see whether a wealthy, modern democracy can solve this crisis entirely through government intervention. And the answer is a resounding no. South Korea will survive, for sure, but it is going to be smaller, older, much poorer, and entirely dependent on foreign alliances that it's going to really struggle to reciprocate. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why this explainer matters to you, no matter where you're watching from. South Korea is just the leading edge. Half of the developed world is on this exact same trajectory by 2060. The big question isn't just what happens to Korea in the next 10 years when those pension systems start to crack. The real question is, what happens when your country follows South Korea right over that demographic cliff? What is the global landscape going to look like when the powerful nations of today shrink into a fraction of their former selves? It is a fascinating yet completely terrifying reality, and I really hope this explainer gave you the structural insight you need to understand it. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.